Welcome everyone to another Working in Tech live stream. Today we have Tarena Lofton joining us, a skilled content and social media professional who has carved out an exceptional career using our storytelling powers. And today we're going to be talking about her background in journalism, public relations, and how she's helping companies tell engaging stories. Welcome to the live stream, Tarena.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so one of the things that, and I'm hoping you can even help me tell better stories as well. One of the things that inspired this live stream is I realized just how sometimes like tech careers are out of reach. Either one, because people don't even know like there's that opportunity exists, or two, how to navigate that, and that's why we break this down. So, from your perspective, like, why did you, if you think when people think about like media, public relation, journalism is something that exists outside the world of tech. How were you able to kind of like connect those two dots together?
Yeah, I will say the way that I got into my current role, I think it kind of found me. I was the kid in junior high that was on like the TV station for the school and always doing like the journalism and stuff like that. But I never thought that I wanted to go into journalism or public relations or anything like that. When I was in college, I ended up going for public relations, and then the journalism and the public relations school merged together. And so
Hmm.
that's how I ended up with a degree in journalism with a concentration in public relations. Um, so,
Amazing.
but the way that I ended up at my current job, I was actually at a brunch. I was interning on the Hill at the time, and I was in DC, and I was kind of wanting to stay in the DMV area, but I wasn't sure how I was going to make the transition. Wasn't sure if staying on the Hill was like something that I wanted to continue to do, or if I wanted to kind of branch out. And I was just having conversations with someone that was at the brunch, and she was like, "Hey, they're looking for a social media intern. At my current role, is that something you'd be interested in?" So I ended up taking that internship, and it ended up turning into a full time role. So the way that I was able to kind of navigate my way into where I am now is just basically figuring out what I was good at and then making a career out of it.
Amazing. And so in all of that, you talk about, getting this internship opportunity. Was that kind of like the plan, or, because, you were really looking for an opportunity, you tapped into that? And what's the importance of, you know, seizing maybe not the opportunity that you want versus seizing the opportunity that you get versus like waiting for the opportunity you want?
Yeah, I mean, was it the plan? Not per se. I mean, I kind of had aspirations of wanting to stay in DC, but I already had applied to grad school back in Indiana and gotten in. And so my plan was to go back to Indiana, do grad program at IU Bloomington, like on campus. And so when I got the summer internship, I was just kind of like, okay, I'll do this for the summer. And then in the fall, I'm going to go back and go to grad school. And then I realized when I was doing it, I was like, hey, I kind of like this company. I kind of like the work that I'm doing here. Why not try and see if I can stay on? So back to your question about just seizing the opportunity versus waiting for what you're really looking for. I think that you have to really weigh your options, but also view each option as an opportunity to grow. So even if it's something that you're not like super excited about, or even if it's just like a quote unquote internship program or something that's not what you're actually looking for, you may be looking for a full time role. Take the internship if it's something that you're interested in the field that you're interested in, and figure out how you can use that to your advantage and how you can learn and grow and network in that current position. Because I mean, everything that you do has value, and I think that it helps to build into where you want to be in the future.
Mm. I think you've touched on another interesting point, which is like transferable skills, right? So you talk about how everything kind of like ties together. And of course, ultimately, it doesn't always look that way. I remember like in my own journey, like sometimes having to go do something tangential that I'm like, you know what, this is not really the path or track I want to be on. But by the time it comes full circle, it's like, oh yeah, Totally. That should have happened, right?
Yeah.
So tell me more about how that kind of like played out in your journey.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the best way to even bring that up is I worked at a hotel for 4 years through college. I knew that I wasn't going to be in hospitality. I don't like to work weekends. I don't like to work like nighttime shifts or anything like that. But during that time, I learned so much about like customer service, so much about being able to speak to people, show up and be on time to a current job. And while those skills aren't something that um, you would say is like necessarily having to do in like the digital strategy or social media landscape when you look at it from like a bird's eye view, like when you actually think about it, you're like, these are skills that I need in everyday life. So again, it's just kind of taking what you can from each role, and being able to transfer that into where you want to go in the future.
And you know what's so powerful about what you say, right? It's that even in my own current role, so I've done, entrepreneurship product program, you know, my new role is more, on the solution architect side. And it's something that I'm learning, right? I'm growing into it, but I think that I'm seeing like so many of the common denominators, and it always boils down to the same things. Like because, for example, solutioning is kind of like almost one level beyond product. Where in product you're just mostly like talking about, this is a problem, this is how what the customers are saying, this is how we want to prioritize the feature development, and then solution is like one level above where you're thinking about architecture, flow, and things like that, which it can be a bit more technical. But ultimately, right, at the end of the day, we're trying to build something that people are going to use. So we still have to go back to the fundamentals. Like, what do
Right.
the customers want to use? How do we want to build something that not just works for, for the time being, but scales for the long term? And how are we thinking about this in terms of our overall strategy? Because you can build something that works today, but you know if it doesn't, if you need to maybe rebuild it or redo it 12 months from now, is it really worth building, or are you better off spending more time, you know kind of like taking your time and actually getting to the root cause? So
Yeah.
you find that, I'm sorry, but
No, no, that's I love that. I love because it seems like you were able to take like little pieces from each of your roles and like kind of build to where you are now, right? And then I
yeah.
don't know if you had that game plan in your mind or if it just kind of ended up working out that way, but I love that like trajectory for you. That's awesome.
Yeah. So and now that you talk about that first role, how did you even end up on the ill in the first place? And was that a plan that you had, or what did that just also kind of like I feel like you have stories to tell there.
Uh, yeah, I feel like that's just kind of the theme of my life or my career. Uh, so far, when I graduated from undergrad, I thought that I wanted to go to law school. I went to law camp in undergrad. I shadowed law classes, like I was in. And so after I graduated, I worked at a law firm for a little bit and I was like, this is not for me. Like, this is not the role that I want to do. I am not going to be happy doing this. So I remember I was literally at my desk at the law firm and I'm like thinking and then looking at like roles and things like that during the workday. And I saw somebody that I did like a cotillion with in high school, and she had applied for this internship program called the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, where they take students and place them on the Hill in different offices. And so I reached out to her and she told me about her experience and she ended up landing a great role on the Hill after. But the best thing about it was that they also paid for your housing in the DMV area or DC, and then they also gave you a stipend. And so, as a recent grad, I was like, free housing and a stipend, and I get to move to DC and work on the Hill. It just kind of worked out. I applied for it. I applied like I think there was like a 2 days before the deadline was supposed to be, and I just sent in my paperwork really fast. Ended up getting the opportunity and moved out to DC. Um,
Wow,
yeah.
that's amazing. And why I see that you talked about staying in DC, going to DC. Why do you like love DC so much?
I I don't know. I'm from Indiana. I'm from the suburbs of Indiana. It's totally different. I In 2016 we took a family trip out to DC. We did the whole like Capitol tour, went to all the monuments and things like that. And in that moment, I was kind of like, I'm gonna be back here. I'm gonna be like working on the hill in some capacity. I'm gonna be doing some type of thing in the DMV area. So it's just when I was here, it just kind of felt like home, and I just kind of knew that I was going to be back here and at some point. I didn't know necessarily how I was going to make it there, but I just kind of knew.
And it kind of worked out, right?
It worked out.
So, how did you deal with the transition of, going from essentially working in government to working at this company where there's some, or at your current company, where there's some, you know, challenges, where there's some things that you noticed that was different, maybe in the culture and the way things worked?
Yeah, it's totally different, totally different. In government, you're really working to help influence policy. You're helping to make policy. You're helping to drive an agenda. In journalism, you're providing information to a demographic of people, and you're making sure that they have like informed the information that they need to make informed decisions. But it's very impartial. Like you can't give your thoughts or opinions. It's really based on fact.
Mm.
So I think that's like the major thing that's different, and something that I kind of struggled with a tad at the beginning. But I think once I got into it a little bit more and I realized that by providing those facts to people, you can still make a change. I think that's when I was kind of like, okay, this is awesome. This is how you can really help to like change the world in an aspect.
Okay, amazing. And I think one of the things that I've seen a lot in your, in your journey, and even like, looking at your profile, is like storytelling. Tell me why that's so important.
People love this story. I mean, it's easier to identify with different causes, with different people, with ideas when you're able to relate to it. And I think that when you're able to tell a story and really drive in as to why something's important, as opposed to just giving like straight facts, I think that helps people understand like the broader aspect of it, and also just understand how it's like important to them and why it should be important to them. So I try to bring storytelling into not only like my job and the types of things that I promote for the company, but also like my own personal things and my own LinkedIn and things like that. I think it just makes things more interesting.
Yeah, and it's so valid that you say that, because as somebody who makes content, who also like has to present ideas to teammates and leadership and things like that. I watched a very interesting video that was talking about like, even how to present. So a lot of people, when they think about presentation, they think about a slide deck and talking through it. But there was something that someone said that, there's, I don't know what it exactly is called, but it's like a sandwich strategy where for you to have a great presentation, it's actually 9 things. So first of all, you start off with like a prompt, right? You ask the audience a question. You don't even go to the slides, because ultimately everything in that communication is about the audience. So you start with a question. You maybe tell a story. Then you go to the slides and maybe point to some numbers. Then you come out of the slide again, and then you have a conversation. And at that point, it's more about the interaction and the engagement than it is about whatever information you're putting there, because the more it feels like a collaborative process, the more they're gonna take on. And ultimately, it's like, even one of the very funny things is that people can retain very little information in like 30 minutes or 1 hour. So it actually helps you when it's an enjoyable conversation sprinkled with like very little facts and details, than
Mhm.
when it's just, in 1974 there were a million this, and then there's this, and then there's that. It's just like, what, can you slow down? And it's so funny, like, at my job, we recently had a town hall where the CEO was talking, and then he's talking about stories about family and things like that, and multiple other things. But then he's talking this little things about, this is where we want to take the company's direction. And then, talks about, this person did this and that. And it's like humor filled. And it's like, you really connect to those stories in between because at the end of the day, it helps you even relate to the person. And I
Yeah.
think that in life, we're all looking for that at a very deep level to be able to connect and relate with people. Because once that happens, then what they're saying means is more impactful to us than if it wasn't.
Right. You're making it about the audience, right? Like what is important to them. And in that aspect, it's you're able to present what you want them to know because they're now invested in what you're saying.
Mm. And how did you even figure that, this was something that was important to tech companies? And I asked that because oftentimes the two biggest blocks that I see that people have is that they don't necessarily always think that this skill, this thing that I'm really naturally good at, can actually be something that works in tech. So when they think about tech, they think it's just software development, right? End of story. Or maybe it's not even a direct conversion, but a big part of that, for example, so of course, product is not just communication, you have to learn other skills. But if you can get people, if you can influence people, if you can learn from people, if you can deduce results, I think those technical skills are like, I'll put it this way, it's a lot easier for you to learn technical skills than for you to learn how to work well with people, communicate to people, and bring people on your side.
Right,
The
right.
one is much harder than the other, but a lot of people don't kind of like connect those two. So, how did you make that connection in your journey?
Honestly, just listening, listening to people, listening to management, understanding where the pain points are and what they are trying to accomplish, and how I'm able to aid them in making the goal, reaching the goal that they're looking to achieve. If they're saying that they want to reach more young people or they want to reach a certain demographic of people, how am I able to shape the content in a way that allows them to accomplish that goal? But and then also like not only doing that, but being good at like presenting the results that I'm able to drive. You'd be amazed by how many people like don't necessarily understand social media, but and then once you show them like its capabilities, or you show them, hey, you can reach this amount of people in like seconds, they see the value in it, and they may have not thought about it or thought that it would be valuable, but once you're able to like demonstrate that, I think that it makes a huge difference.
So it's actually so interesting that you say that because I started my career in social media,
Oh,
and
really?
this was way back when, right? So it's actually interesting that that's still a challenge that you face. So what are some challenges? Maybe that's a nice segue, right? What are
Mhm.
some challenges about being a content slash social media strategist that you face today?
I think one of the main challenges is I know that we've all seen the changing landscape of social media, whether it's from Twitter, that's now X, to TikTok potentially being banned. Everything is changing all the time. And I think that sometimes people want to know what that means, and they're really anxious to jump and make sure that you're staying with the times and being current and being aggressive in that aspect. But I think sometimes just convincing people that like the best thing is to wait and see what's going on, can be a bit challenging. So that's what's top of mind now. I think a close second is I work in a newsroom. It's full of people who are amazing writers, extremely important or extremely intelligent. But I think sometimes there's like fear to get into social media and really promote themselves. And I'm like, you're so great at this. So I think just figuring out how to empower people to use social to their advantage, I think is also another challenge.
That's very okay. That's really key. Um, and also, because again, like one of the challenges that I think oftentimes people have to make is that this is actually also a viable channel to investing, right? Whether
Mhm.
that's more time, more resources. How do you navigate that?
I've been very, very blessed, very blessed to work for a company that like supports us like 10 toes down. Um, if we can make a really good use case for why we think that something would be important or why we think that this would be something good to experiment in, they're always like game for it. So that's not something I've necessarily had to go up against or really argue against. I think it's just one thing I will say though is like if you are running against that type of challenge, just really figuring out how you can demonstrate the value of social and how you can demonstrate having certain resources would make your job easier, but also enhance the company or enhance the mission would really help to kind of boost that, boost it and make people want to invest a little bit more into it.
Okay, that's valid. So, one of the things that you talked about is like getting into your current company was just from like a casual conversation at brunch, right? And that shows the power of networking. Ultimately, sometimes you don't even know where your next job or next opportunity is going to come from. So, aside from that example, how has like the power of networking helped you unlock value in your career so far?
Networking has been key for me. A lot of the things that I've gotten or a lot of the opportunities I've gotten have been either through networking or someone DMing me on LinkedIn. So I think like the strongest thing that you can do is one, growing a big network and really checking in on the people that you end up meeting. Not only just hitting them up like when you need something, but also checking in, not like pretty continuously and asking them, how their day is going, what's new with them, and things like that. But also just keeping your LinkedIn fresh, keeping your LinkedIn interesting, posting on the actual platform and engaging with different people. I think sometimes people underestimate how many doors LinkedIn can open up for you if you just kind of invest a little bit of time in it.
Yeah, that's very key. I think that's something that people don't pay a lot of attention to, but it is powerful. And for someone trying to start out, brand new today, what would be one advice that you're gonna give them to navigate this space?
It doesn't always have to be you working with like a huge brand or you working at a company. Sometimes social media or digital strategy is you running your own platforms or running organizations platforms that you volunteer for. Just collecting all of that data and all of the work that you're doing and creating a portfolio. So that way, when you do have opportunity to move forward into like your dream career or into like a bigger opportunity, you already have all of that laid out. For instance, one of the first things that I did in social media was run like the social pages for my chapter for my sorority. And I took all of that to help land like jobs in the future. So all content that you create is good and you can always use that in your portfolio for later.
Amazing. So, and what does in this role, what does the typical earning potential look like, right? How much can someone expect to make when they're brand new in the role? As their career progresses, how much can they expect to make, and like as everything, as they maybe become more senior, what can they expect?
This is really, really a broad question, super broad. I think it depends a lot on like where you're working, what you're doing. Also, like social media and digital strategy and things like that are totally such a broad landscape. I don't know like what actual numbers to provide for that. um, yeah,
I think
I
the
mean,
range is fine. Just again, just to give an idea to anyone even thinking about it. Of course, I know like the usual caveats will be there. Like it will depend on industry, it will depend on size of company. But what's typical.
yeah, I mean, I've seen people making like anywhere from like from their first starting out, anywhere from like 60, but I've also seen people making like well into the hundreds when they're starting out. So I think it just really depends on like where you're starting and what type of background you're bringing to the opportunity. And also like some people do freelance and things like that, and you can leverage that for higher wages as well.
Mm. So one of the things that I've seen, is that, there was a trend almost like to kind of like get everyone into digital marketing, but it kind of like feels like that hype cycle has kind of like died. So for anyone really thinking about that career, where do you see the most value now, as a professional working in this space?
Um, I guess it just, could you rephrase the question?
So what I mean is that, they maybe like maybe 5 6 years ago, there's a bunch of like gurus online. It's like, oh, digital marketing this, digital marketing that. But I feel like the hype has died. But I mean, like you are, there's still like real career opportunities there, right?
Yeah.
So how again, in a space that has been rife with a lot of misconceptions and like, I'd probably say just bad news in general. How does one going in there like keep that sanity? What are the steps like, okay, maybe pay attention to this, build this specific skills and like, target this kind of companies or, things like that.
Yeah, I guess it depends on like what you want to do. So, and then first pick out what you want to do. Do you want to do like email marketing? Do you want to do brand strategy? Do you want to do content creation? Do you want to um, maybe work on like text message strategy? Like, first pick out what you want to do and then figure out how to get really good at that particular thing. What I've noticed about like this particular field is that they tried to mesh a lot of job titles into one. That's always a red flag. So that's something to look out for. But like when you find something that you're like really good at and that you're really interested in, figure out how you're able to really get very, very good at that particular skill and then look for a job that's going to make you do only that skill. And while you should know a little bit about everything, I think it's better to kind of focus in on like what you really want to focus on instead of trying to dip your hands into everything.
Yeah, that's it's interesting that that also works in marketing, but that almost sounds like the advice that we get from everybody week in week out. It's like specialization is where it's at.
Yeah.
So one of the really awesome achievements or accomplishments that I've seen is that you know um, you were able to drive engagement in one of your roles you know, to 89%, 89% higher than what it was and grow by over 14,000 new followers. What were some of the tactics that helped you unlock that type of growth?
Consistency. Definitely consistency. There was a lot of posting and not really feeling like we were getting anywhere for a while, but also really figuring out what works well for our audience and then like keening in on that and really creating content in that manner. I understand like the whole wanting to go with trends or wanting to go with something that's popular, but you really have to listen to your audience and make content based on what they want to see. Because at the end of the day, that's who's engaging with what you're what you're posting.
Mm. So when it comes to strategy, I seen, I followed this person who kind of like built out like the whole Duolingo strategy, and I'm always fascinated whenever she posts and shares, you know, things from where she was building that out. Are there other stories like that that you've seen out there that really inspire you?
Yeah, something that I've been really this is I haven't done like a ton of research on their strategy, but something that I've been like really interested in lately is Elmo's page. I don't know if you follow them or not, but
I've heard story. I've kind of
yeah,
like caught a bit here and there.
and I hadn't even been following them at all until I think it was like a post on X where they said, how is everyone doing? And then everyone responded like, we're doing terrible, Elmo, and things like that. But and then I started to like scroll through and look at their content, and I'm like, this is the most wholesome thing ever. And you'd be surprised the amount of adults that are interacting with the content where you
Yeah.
wouldn't think that um that would be the case just because it's like mostly centered towards a younger demographic of people. But and then when that post exploded, the creator of or the person who like creates the content for that platform ended up like posting on LinkedIn, and it's a woman who's like 25, and I think she said this was like her first job or something like that. It was just like really amazing to see how um one, she something so simple as like really identified with like a large mass of people, but also how she is really just like doing such a great job so early in her career.
Mm. That's yeah. That I definitely did see that post, and it's amazing. And I think it ties back to what you said originally, that I think even like it doesn't get thought about that way, but I think like marketing and social media is definitely an art form, and I think the reason why we connect with artists in like music and those type of things is because there's something that first of all I think goes back to communication, like we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's one, being able to see a little bit of ourselves in them, but I think like that originality of also seeing something that we haven't seen before, right?
Right.
And I don't think that there's a direct formula necessarily in this realms or spaces, because in some cases it's like this super hyper produced content, or maybe it's like something really remarkable, but sometimes it's something simple like how are you doing, and everybody just loses their minds, right?
Yeah.
So
The
and I definitely think that's some, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the super produced content that you mentioned made me think about Barbie and the whole like the whole campaign that they had behind that and all of the money and time and energy that was spent behind that, which was I think well worth it. I think it was amazing and it got so many eyes on the concept of it. Even people who probably weren't that interested in the movie like went to go see it just because they were interested in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think either works for sure, just depending on what your audience wants.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, like you make a really good point, because ultimately I think it ties back to one thing still. It's still that audience obsession, like you said, because I think, and I didn't get this insight till like a few years ago, where I heard like a movie producer who was interviewed who, didn't really have a lot of budget. So he'll make like a lot of like low budget, not necessarily low quality, but low budget horror movies. And he shared like this his whole like strategy behind it. It's because he says, first of all, you need a big budget to make like superhero movies. The one that's like it can be crappy, and like because of just how it's supposed to be gory and all those things,
Right.
it just works to if it doesn't have too much money behind it. And he found like a really great niche and was able to nail the storytelling, nail everything else around like this concept, and it works. And
Mhm.
then it was juxtaposing it between like big studios and just having a big budget and having a big movie, not necessarily because like they can justify, because there was a good idea behind it, but it was almost like too big to fail. And that is like we've seen like people, because I don't think like there's a way to make a cheap like first Black Panther movie. You can't, right? Like it's the splendor, it's the grandeur that gets
Yeah.
us, right? So, but it can't just be that for that sake. There has to be something that makes it like this can only work when it's larger than life, right? Because if you do it otherwise, then it's not going to work. We're not going to really buy into it. We're not going to, there's some stories that are better told like down to earth, and there are
Right.
some stories that are better told, in the big way that they should be. And I think always being able to kind of like find that balance is kind of like the art that you're doing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And something else that I wanted to touch on that you mentioned, like you kind of um, said, but like at the end of the day, the story is what people care about, right? Like even if you have like a super crappy set or something that's not great at all, like if your story is amazing, people are still going to watch it. And it may not be as big as Black Panther, but I mean, people will still like the story. So that just goes to show that like how important storytelling is.
Yeah. And that leads me to my next question. So, it's easy to make stories about fun things like superhero movies and and Black inspirational stories. But I think telling stories about healthcare policy, that's not something that sounds fun on its own. Like, how are you able to kind of like condense some of these like really challenging topics into the kind of content and information that people want to consume?
Yeah, I would not call it fun, especially especially during a global pandemic. That was a rough rough time in the social media of health policy and healthcare. So I think just honestly figuring out like how we can make the content as relatable to people as possible and like why it's important to them. If there's like a really big fact or something like that that would impact a lot of people and we can pull that out of the story and use that to create content, I think that's kind of what we're going to zero in on instead of, getting into the super nitty gritty aspect. But also making really complicated topics like, which isn't particularly that complicated, but like Medicare and Medicaid, how do you make those topics digestible for people and how do you make it translated into lay terms? That's like the biggest thing that you can do to kind of make it a little bit more digestible for a social audience.
Yeah. So quick announcement. If you're just joining, this is the Working in Tech live stream. We host this once or twice every week. Today we have Tarena, who is a content and social media strategist, and she's been telling us about all the amazing work that she's doing. So definitely, I think we're gonna live. I don't know if you want to connect with people, but we can live your LinkedIn if you do want to. If people want to connect and follow you on social media as well, and then please like, share, subscribe. We want to get more people locked into the stories. There's some amazing career stories about you and hopefully help you. Hopefully, this stories will also help you build yours. And very quickly, we're going to be taking questions in another, like, I'll probably say 5 minutes. So if you have any questions for Tarina, please feel free to look them in the chat. We'll start taking them shortly. But, back to you, Tarina. Um, One of the things that I also see that's important in tech careers in general is the need to have mentorship, right? Because two things that I see in terms of like the biggest impact of mentors is one, if someone has traveled a journey before, they can help you basically make that journey shorter, so you're not groping in the dark trying to figure out where you really need to be. As that, have you seen that in your career so far?
Definitely seen it in my career and I'm really, really lucky in the aspect of a lot of people have just kind of taken me underneath their wing and really just looked out for me. Um, like I can honestly say that I've been in a lot of rooms because people like purposely put me in the rooms and knew that I would be able to learn and benefit from them, as opposed to saying like, oh, she's just junior or oh, she's just an intern and not including me in those conversations. So yeah, definitely have like a lot of really great mentors and a lot of people that I can call on. And that's just been like very, very vital for my career.
And so, for anyone starting out brand new, what's the number one advice that you'd give them? Or that maybe to make it even more real to you, if you were talking to your earlier self trying to start out, what's the number one thing you'd say to yourself?
Always be ready. I always say put in the work now for your future, right? So like you're always working on things, always trying to improve, always trying to build networks and things like that, and laying those seeds. So when the right opportunity comes and it's your time to actually progress in the way that you want to progress, you already have all the materials that you need, or you're close to having all the materials that you need, instead of like having a really great opportunity come and then you haven't done any of the work. So that's what I would tell myself, and I feel like I've been lucky enough to do is just, continuously be working on improving yourself and perfecting your craft so that way you're ready for the future.
Yeah. It's interesting because one of my former coworkers and I had a running joke where if we had to do something tomorrow and maybe we could do it today, we'll say, you know what, that's future me's problem. We'll still do it, but it was just like this funny joke. So yeah, I think you're saying like, don't do that. Do the opposite of that. Take care
Yeah,
of it. So future you will say, yeah, you did great.
I did also. I mean, I guess as long as you make the deadline,
Still works, right?
it still works.
Um, so your experience is across like multimedia content, design, video editing, strategy, and hands-on creation. What skills do you find most challenging to develop the most at first?
Oof. Um, I would say I think in different areas of my career it was different skills, right? If I'm working or I'm in like a position where I don't have a lot of time, like free time, it's very hard for me to be creative and it's very hard for me to like continue to develop those skills. So like content creation, like as far as like actually putting together graphics and thinking of ideas for different graphics and videos and things like that is really hard. Um, so I think it honestly, and I think it just depends on like where you are. That's probably like what's the most challenging. So I don't think it's like a particular skill that has been challenging. I think it's like different periods in the career that's made things more challenging.
And how do you navigate that? So let's say, for example, you're in a season where you're having to do more video work. What's
Hmm.
like a model or formula that helps, just make you a bit more that kind of like helps because ultimately, again, one of the things that I've seen in my journey, and I don't know if you also seen it, is oftentimes not even the skill, like you said, that's challenging. It's just getting over like the mental block. Because at first, it's like I have all these different things to do, but maybe like the biggest thing I need to know is like just be able to make these video transitions, right? And
Right.
now I can do, if I figure out how to do video transitions, then I go to the next thing, which may be special effects, and maybe it's this other thing. And then before you know it, I have like 5 or 6 different skills that you can leverage or cobble together. Maybe you're still not um, Kevin Costner, right? But at least you're better. You're maybe 5 or 6 times better than you
Mhm.
three days ago. What
Yeah.
what are some of those things in your journey?
I think what really helps me is one being around like other creative people, other really talented people, um, and like learning from them and being able to like ask them questions and see how they would think about certain things and not being afraid to like actually talk to people who are more advanced than me. And I guess that kind of leads into like the second thing is like not being afraid to admit like what I don't know instead of I feel like earlier in my career I was kind of like, oh, I have to know everything and I'm going to figure it out and I can just, Google it. But like now, of course there are certain things that are googleable, right? Like you don't need to ask people like certain things. But if there's like a certain skill that I want to learn how to do, like for instance, there's like a video editor that's on my team now, and she's like really good at videos. If I want to learn how to do something quickly with videos, I can spend like 3 hours trying to figure it out myself, or I can ask her and she can show me and then like demo it. And then now I've got a new skill and it took half the time, right? So being able to like be around people who are smarter than me is like really top of the tier, but and then also like asking questions.
It's great. So we have our first question in, and it's hi Tarena. What does a typical day look like for you? If there is a typical day.
Yeah, I mean it. It honestly depends. I spend a lot of time like creating content, posting content, really strategizing what's going on in the news cycle. I don't work in like a breaking news type of newsroom, so we're not doing like breaking news. So it's not that fast paced. But if there is something like a court decision that came out, or um, something that's coming out like bird flu is really popular now. Like figuring out how we can use content that we already have, or stories that we already have, and leverage those to kind of get in that news cycle is something that I do daily. And then also, I spend like a pretty good chunk of time just kind of like writing like copy, but I also write for like radio and things like that. So it's typical day.
Okay. And wow, this one sounds heavy. Where would you like to be in? Where would you like to be in the next 10 years?
Oh wow, putting me on the spot here. In the next 10 years, I think what I would like to be doing is more so directing strategy instead of creating content, and helping to get particular topics or things like that in front of the right types of people. Something that I'm really passionate about is making sure that people have the information that they need and they're able to understand the information. So whether that's like in the aspect of me presenting different content that's already created to particular groups of people, and like going out and finding those particular groups of people and showing them this is why you should be using our content, or something that's a little bit less scaled back. But 10 years out, I don't know if I've thought as deeply into that, but now you've given me some homework to do.
Okay. If you have any more questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I do have a question of my own as well. Ha, again, this almost feels like a slam dunk, right? You went to college for journalism. Now you're essentially in journalism, right? But what are some of those skills that you learn, in college that's helping you out in this role?
Oof. Um, Honestly, like it's not even the stuff that I learned in the classroom per se. It's the working as a like a content person for my sorority, or the internship where I had to figure out how to like write press releases and pull news clips and understand how like different people are digesting media. That's like really helping me in my career now. Um, yeah, and I think also just like the social aspect of like college and things like that, like getting to know people, really figuring out how to like market yourself was something that I was able to do, particularly in like the second half of my college career. So those are skills that I still carry on now.
And it's so interesting because I was gonna touch on it, but I think we kind of like got into other conversation. There's something so powerful about, um, for example, you talked about customer service working at your very first job in college.
Mhm.
I think there's something that people don't pay a lot of attention to. It's like when we talk about tech, oftentimes it's just the medium, right? So, for example, if you're at your job, you're working with other people to either, figure out what news to share, what platforms to build, what technologies to build, and at the end of the day, you're still trying to serve all of that work to people. So,
Right.
end consumer could be people using your app, people reading the news, people watching the videos, people are going to like, share, and connect on social media. So, it's almost impossible to not engage and interact with people in your career or your tech career for that matter.
Right.
And it's so funny, like, we're so impressed by machine learning, but like humans have been learning forever, right? And it's like, even though it might not be documented or something that you see, but every single day you're interacting with other stakeholders, you start to learn, maybe it's better to present my ideas this way. That way I realize I get less pushback. Or, when I share this post, I realize that, it doesn't get as much likes, but maybe when I post it as a question, then people feel the need to engage. Or I've realized that, it's better to post 2 slides instead of 3 slides because now it's less information. Like, taking in all those nuances. So by the time you maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years in, it's a lot more different now because again, those experiences with people over time are teaching you like this really important, aspects. And it's like, how have you been able to kind of like bring all of that together, right? Or has it been a similar experience for you that, maybe you were talking to people, taking bookings, doing all of that in that role, and maybe it's completely away from that now. But maybe you notice that, when I smile and say hi to people, they respond to that. And I realized that, of course, social media, I can't really smile and say hi, but can I still bring that same joy in the way that I share content and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. Like I use that every day. I think one of the biggest things that I learned is not always the information that you're delivering, but the way that you're delivering it. So, like, for instance, if I had to tell someone something super bad from like the customer service days at the hotel, if you're like empathetic and you're telling them, I'm really sorry that this happened. I wish that this didn't happen. This is how I'm going to make it right for you, as opposed to just, presenting them with the information and just like not really caring about how they felt about it. Like they're going to receive that information totally different. And so that's the same thing that I'm doing now. Like people may not really want to read about like health policy, but they do want to read about why their medical bill is so high or how they're able to like um, lower the cost of their prescription drugs or something like that. So it's just really kind of shaping it into what they want to see and presenting it in the best way that's good for them, not like what's necessarily good for me.
So it's even like going one step beyond the information to like, thinking about the receptors, right? What if somebody's stressed out about something, you don't want to share that stressor again with them. It's like,
Uh,
I know you're stressed out about this, but have you considered that this can make you feel better about that thing? So shaping this, it's still the same information, but shaping it as something that helps and enables instead of just something that piles onto what you're already feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Making them feel like you care about their issues, not just like it's more than just a job, it's really about the person and what you're trying to deliver. And I think the only way that you're able to do that is by being passionate about what you do and actually caring about it. So, yeah.
That's a really important point because one of the things also that I've seen that's interesting is that I think in many of these roles, even because ultimately I think like there's a you use a word, you said you don't know if it's necessarily fun, right? Like not every job it will be fun and not every job will be essentially what you want to do in the moment. But I feel like you still kind of like have to get into it, right? For it to work. So
Yeah.
can that be challenging sometimes?
Sometimes for sure. Like not all of the topics. For instance, I worked at like a strategic communications firm and we did a lot on like offshore wind and things like that. I wasn't particularly interested in that topic. A lot of the content went over my head, to be honest. I just didn't really get it, but like it was my job to figure it out and my job to ask questions and my job to figure out how I can break it down so that I can better explain it to people. So like yeah, I mean it's challenging, but it's that's what you have to do. You have to figure out how to become interested in it and figure out if you're the person and you're delivering the information and you want other people to be interested in it and you can't even make yourself interested in the topic, like how are you going to deliver it and make it interesting to someone else? Like it just doesn't make sense.
That's true. That's true. So we have one more question. It's so do I need courses or certifications to become a brand strategist? And maybe I'll just add a follow on to that. Is like, what are some good courses?
Yeah, I mean, you don't technically need them. I'd say like experience is probably the best thing that you could do in order to get into the field. But I know that like I don't know if you have LinkedIn Premium or not, but a lot of the courses and things like that, you can definitely kind of rack up on there and just get different certifications through that. But you could also go like the more traditional way and go through different colleges and universities to get certifications.
Okay. And okay, I think you answered both. You said not necessarily, but if you do, this is um, so one other question that I had was, again, I know like again you're still on the journey, but if you could do something a little differently, would you what would you do differently? Or you kind of like looked at it and still said, oh no, not or even if you looked at it and said, you know what, everything I've done has kind of like brought me to this journey, where there are things that maybe you might have knowing what you know now, you might have taken to shorten the path.
You're not letting me cough out of this answer.
No.
I'm definitely the person who's like, everything happens for a reason. This is why this all worked out that way. If I could do anything different, which I wouldn't, to be honest, because I'm here for a reason, but it would probably just be to be more like engaged and like network more and just be more involved in like my earlier career in college. I think that it just would have helped with like networking and being more connected to the university and things like that, if I would have just kind of branched out a little bit more. I commuted, so I would go to class, go home right after class, not really spend a ton of time on campus like the first 2 years. So um, I think that that's what I would do.
That's why it's not good to cop out, because that's a really good one. And I think that that's almost like a regret that so many people have. It's like you hear people say like, I wish I just started sooner, or I wish I'd done this differently, because career compounding, at least that's what I like to call it, is a very real thing. Like if you I had a guest on the podcast who in the last maybe 2 to 3 years has grown his LinkedIn by like 3,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's speaking this year. I've seen it like maybe at 5 different conferences, and he's
Yeah.
gotten that just through networking, brute force, reaching out and saying, "Hey, if you need me to come speak, I have this many years of experience. I'm more than happy to come share that." Right, and that has worked so well for him. So ultimately, I think it comes back down to that concept or idea of reaching out. And he was saying that, all of this years has been building this experience. Imagine if he's done the same thing he's done over the last 2 years, but, in 15 years, right? Imagine where it could be. So that's definitely a very valid one, right? Around being able to start earlier. But again, it's because you know what you know now, right? But
Right.
you didn't know it then.
Yeah. And I guess also like just taking opportunity, like sometimes people will ask you to do something or like ask you for your expertise or something like that, and you're like, oh no, like why would they ask me? I don't know why I'm being selected for this, but I'm like, the person reached out to you and asked you, so like maybe just do it and then learn from it. So that kind of goes hand in hand of just like hand in hand with just starting, just
Mhm.
being bold enough to take on opportunities.
Yeah, that part is also very key, because I think, yeah, you're right. Especially like for a lot of people who are introverted and things like that, tend to be more one, it's maybe even like not wanting to do the work. Sometimes it's like not wanting to disappoint the person. Sometimes it's like fear of failure. Like, you know, at least if I don't try, my record is intact. I didn't fail at that, right? But
Right.
oftentimes I think that there's so much to be learned doing something wrong,
Right.
right? Than like not doing it at all. And that's something that I've realized in my journey. It's like even like there were things that I didn't think I had the skill for or I thought I really could do, but sometimes I was just put in a position where I couldn't say no. And then when I do it, it opens up like this world of possibilities. Like it almost feels like it was my idea to begin with, right?
Hold on. This is actually a good idea. I can't believe I thought this.
Yeah. I'm like, what was your role in all of this again?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, we're coming towards the end. Thank you so much for coming on. Usually, we reserve this last piece, whether it's like you want to give a shout out, you want to plug something, whether you got a book coming out, a big movie coming out, you're starting your own company. We've had that before. So, whatever you want to shout out or plug, this is the moment.
Yeah, I'd like to give a shout out to my fiance, John. He was on this podcast, I think, like 2 weeks ago. So you should go back and watch his episode also. Yeah, and I think my LinkedIn will be added to the bio, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I will
So
add it in the link.
feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I post some pretty good stuff on there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining. This has been really, really amazing.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's the stream for tonight.